just a recap of what we talked about last time. So, anyways, so Jonah has been swallowed by this fish. He didn't really expect it, but as soon as he gets what he wants, as soon as he's thrown into the ocean, he's like, cool, I don't have to do what God is telling me to do. As soon as he gets there, he goes, wow, these consequences suck. And he's like, God save me from these consequences. And I think a lot of time, when we think about consequences, we think, especially we've all been raised in families for the most part, we think we do something bad and God gives us, and our parents give us consequences. And that's not usually how God works. Sometimes it is, but usually how it works is you do stupid things and you get stupid prizes. Play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, right? So if I'm living my life outside of relationship with God, or if I'm living my life but I'm like holding something away from God, and I'm like, God, you can have my life but not this sin, not me getting angry, not me stealing, any of these things, those things have consequences in our lives. Does that make sense? So it's not God always, and usually not God giving us these consequences directly, but often it's us, our own things that we're holding back that bring us consequences. Anyway, so Jonah starts praying. He's like, God, I don't actually want this consequence, because oftentimes when we actually get to a place of consequence, when we get to a place where we have to deal with what our actions have caused, it's not a fun place to be, right? So a good example of this is when you have to study for a test at school. How many people, raise your hand if you have at one point just not studied for a test you should study for? Awesome. Good job, everyone. Except for Seth. Seth, you're amazing. But anyway, so we've all had this place where we're like, we know what we should do. I mean, test is a good example because I think everyone's had that position before, right? And then we don't. And I don't know how many of you have done this, but I've done this before. I'm like, God, help the test to be postponed so that I don't have to deal with the consequences of my actions, right? And that's exactly what Jonah is praying in this prayer so far. He's going, God, I know I messed up. Don't make me have to deal with the consequences. Thank you for that. Thank you for saving me from those consequences, right? And there's a lot of serious consequences, like studying for a test, right? Consequences, you do bad on the test. All in all, no matter how old you are in the moment and in the future, that consequence isn't the worst thing ever. Even if you fail the class, it's not ruining your whole life, right? Not saying don't study, you should study and stuff. But I have a story from my friend who lives in, one of my friends who lives in Wisconsin, and he's been talking to me for the last two weeks at this point, and I asked him if I could share part of his story of what's going on with him. So basically, he called me a week and a half ago and was like, my life is falling apart. It's like, oh, great to hear. This is a really random phone call to get. We haven't talked in 3 months. And so he calls me, he says that, and he's like, yeah, my wife says we're taking a break. She took the 2 kids, and we're gonna get back together in 3 months. And I have no idea what I should do. I'm like, oh, that's a thing. That exists. I don't know what to say to that, especially over the phone, right? And so as we're talking, I'm like, so what? What's going on? And he kind of winds his way through this story of these things that are going on in his life, and he kind of gets to this place where he's like, I think part of the problem, and this isn't all the problem, but part of the problem is that he's had a lot of anger problems. He's not violent or anything, but he just gets really angry, and he walks out of the house or different things. His anger kind of spurts out in different parts of his life. I have any reason to be angry, which is really kind of a frustrating thing, and that's, I would say, one of the consequences that's coming out in his life is he's angry. And he even pinpointed the last time we talked, he was like, I think it's because I've always, going back to when I was 17, I felt that God wants me to be in actual in professional ministry. I think he wants me to be a pastor or a missionary. And I kind of been like, no, I'm good. And so he kind of he's been living his life. He's a great guy. He's been working, kind of just a normal job. Not really going anywhere, but doing good for himself. But he's really frustrated with the way his life is turning out. But he's also very complacent. He's very stuck in what he's doing. You know what I mean? He goes to work, has his family, goes to sleep, goes to work, sees his family, he goes to sleep. And that's his life. And even though he has a relationship with God, he's been holding back this part of his life from God. He's been holding back. He's been saying, that's too hard, I'm good. Right? And that is coming out in his life in a very sideways direction, where he's frustrated, then he's angry, and then other things are happening. And that's not God going, because you're not doing this, this is your consequence. It's saying, because you're holding back part of your life from God, you're experiencing this. It's just a natural thing that happens, right? And that's kind of what I want you guys to see from Jonah, right? So he's inside the belly of the fish, and he's dealing with all this stuff, and the waves are swirling around him. He's getting pulled deeper and deeper, and he doesn't want to deal with the consequences, okay? So, really quick, similar to my friend, or to studying for a test, with your note card, go ahead and answer this question. What is something about your life you are keeping from Christ? What is a consequence that you have been feeling from keeping that from God? That was worded really well, sorry about that. There's too many prompts. Anyways, so what is something that you've been keeping from Christ about your life, whether it be a sin that you haven't dealt with because you wanted to keep it, or just something that you haven't wanted to give over to him? Does that make sense? Whether it be serving him more, whether it be giving him more time, whether it be all of these different things. What is something you've been keeping, and can you just think about it, what is something that might be coming out of that? No rush, but when you are done, go ahead and look up at me so that I know that you're done. And we'll stop writing. You know. So I want you guys to remember, like, there's two ways that this happens, right? We talked about last week a little bit about how there's more general things that God calls us to, like he calls us to charity, he calls us to living in right relationship with him, and there are more specific things, right? So in this instance, Jonah's experiencing God saying, do this, and Jonah's like, no. But a lot of times, it also is just, we're made in a specific way. We've talked about this at Youth Group before. We're made in a specific way, that there are certain things that are healthy for us and certain things that are unhealthy. And if we live in the ways that are unhealthy, we deal with that because they're unhealthy. Right? So, cool. Everyone good? Check mark. Okay, so next we're going to go to Jonah 2:4-7. Truck along. So Jonah keeps praying. He says, I said, I have been banished from your sight. This is weird because Jonah is praying about a prayer that he just prayed. Cool. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me, seaweed was wrapped up around my head, to the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever, but you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you in your holy temple. So Jonah is almost there. He's halfway there so far in this prayer, right? So what he sees is he's going, hey, I know that I screwed up, and I'm looking to you to save me, right? And in looking to God to save him, the problem is that Jonah is only looking for that, right? So it's back to like the test thing. When I pray for God to postpone the test, honestly, I've actually had this happen before when I prayed that, and then the teacher was like, oh, we're not going to do the test till Friday instead of Wednesday. And do you know what I did? I didn't study. And in a lot of ways, we learn from to consequences of our actions, right? We learn from having to deal with the negative things that happen because of what we've done. And so God rarely just kind of pulls us out of the consequences. He very rarely just says, hey, you don't have to deal with that anymore. You're good, I got you. Usually what he says is, hey, you're going to deal with this, and I'll deal with it with you, and we'll push through it. So the problem is that Jonah's not thinking that. Doesn't seem like to me. It seems like Jonah's going, save me from these consequences. God, I worship you. I look to your temple. I look to you. Save me. But I think most people know from the rest of the story of Jonah, he's not the greatest at like doing actually what God asked him to do later, right? And in the same way, with my friend in Wisconsin, if he sees this is what I need to do, this is why I'm angry, this is why I'm frustrated, this is why, some of the things in my life are falling apart, that comes to, if he looks at that and goes, God save me from these consequences, and God does, and then he just like keeps doing the same thing that he's been doing the whole time, he's going to keep doing the same thing, and those consequences are going to come back again. If I don't study for the test that I didn't have the consequences from, I'm going to have them same 2 days later, right? If I feel God calling me to do a specific thing, and God saves me from the consequences of not doing that, and then I'm like, well, now that I don't need to, because I'm not feeling anything, I can just let it go. Because dealing with consequences isn't easy, it's not fun, it's hard, and it's terrible, and it's not awesome, right? But it's the pushing through those consequences and that helps us to grow, right? So, we're on to the last part of this chapter, verses 8 through 10. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them, but I, with shouts of grateful praise will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. It's also the last mention of the fish. It's not that important of a character. Could have been an octopus, it wouldn't matter. Anyways, so what's going on is Jonah saying, those who cling to worthless idols, they turn away. And in a lot of ways, when we have the position of, we start dealing with the consequences for our actions, when we start dealing with these negative things, we have a choice. We have two options. We have option A, which is turn to God, push through those consequences. And we have option B, which is keep doing the same things we have been doing and hoping they start working. And that one doesn't work very often, right? If my friend in Wisconsin, if he's having trouble and he goes, you know what I should do? I should just do more of my job right now, and I should just, dig in right where I am. It's like, no, that's just going to make you more frustrated, and it's going to make you more angry. In the same way, if you look at something that you've been keeping from God, if you keep your time from God, I think that's a big one that I've had trouble with throughout my life, is keeping time from God, like using time unwisely in a lot of ways, and then going, I didn't have time to read my Bible today. I did have time for 4 hours of video games, but I'm keeping that from God. If I start, dealing with, wow, I'm not feeling connected to God, and my answer is, well, maybe it's because Bible reading is just not that important, and so I'll do more video games. It's not going to help. It's just going to keep you down that same trajectory, right? And Jonah says, but I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. He's going to sacrifice, in his time he's thinking, sacrificing animals or sacrificing his life, right? We should look to God and we say, I can sacrifice these things in my life. I can sacrifice my time. I can sacrifice this sin that I shouldn't be doing. I can sacrifice the fun that I would have doing this other thing to God and his plan and his mission and growing closer to him. Right? Okay. So, all of that to say is, when we start experiencing those consequences, we have a choice. Turn to God and ask him to help you push through what you're dealing with, or ignore him more. And the way we're created, ignore him more doesn't work. Okay? So, go ahead and grab your note cards one more time. Is there another side? And if not, Toby made more.
Toby is overachieving.
What? Yes. So, can you push through a consequence you are feeling in your life? Feeling with? Wow, I'm doing great. And how can you ask for God's help in working through this? Because here's the deal. If you look at this and you go, I'm having this thing come out in my life that's not healthy for me and I need to deal with it, and your response is, I'm going to do this on my own, it's not going to work. Yes, Daniel. You look like you.
Is that there for a reason?
Is what there for a reason?
That's not a correct sentence.
Yes, no. This word should not be there this way.
Okay, that word.
You are feeling in your life.
Or feeling on it.
Yeah. Get rid of the with there. I apologize. You know, I could like edit it right now. Whoa. So yeah, go ahead and answer that question. When you're done, you can like look up at me and stuff. Just as a reminder, last week we used these in our small groups. You were going to want to keep these for small group. I am, because last time you wrote it on a plate and then didn't bring the plate.
I didn't in my head. I said it perfectly.
When you are done, go ahead and look up at me so that we can move along. So one thing I want you guys to think about is this is kind of on the opposite side of last week. Last week, we were talking about the positive things we can do to push more into Christ, to draw nearer to Christ, to draw nearer to God, and align ourselves more with Him. And this week is kind of the opposite side of that is, what are like the barriers that we can remove that are making us farther away from God? What are the barriers that are coming out? I say sideways, it's an old term that we used to use at a place that I used to work at when things come out sideways. Like, you may be doing this, but like you have a consequence or a bad feeling that like comes out towards someone else or in a different part of your life. So how can we remove those bad things so that we can draw closer to God? Because as a really dumb analogy, if I'm right here, and there's a fence right here, and God's right there, it's going to be really hard to hug God through a fence. You know what I mean? So as much as I want to draw near to Him, part of the job is to remove the barriers that I have put up there so that I can draw near to Him. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Cool. So with that, I'm going to pray us out, and we are going to go to small groups. Everyone bow your eyes and close your heads. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time to look at Jonah's prayer and to look at what it looks like to notice and know that you are in a wrong space with God. And Lord, please help us to know that while we are, like, as Christians, we can still be out of line with God in some ways. And as we see those, and as we see the issues that we have like, kind of coming out of us and in other parts of our lives, please help us to notice them and then understand that we can't just deal with the symptoms, we have to deal with the source of the problems. Lord, please help us to learn more through our small group time and to grow closer to those in our small groups. In Jesus' name, amen. End stream.
Well, maybe I can't stop my fingers and end the stream. Don't worry about that.
End stream.
You could just unplug it.
What? She had parked.
What?
Piano.
Why'd you copy me? You copy me? You copy me? I have some details. Finally caught up on that.
Okay, high school guys, downstairs to the big room.
Good luck.